What's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. So I thought I'd do a quick video with a reaction to Brendan Rodgers' press conference today ahead of the league opener against St Mirren at Celtic Park on Sunday. And I'm just going to give my thoughts on what the Celtic manager said today and just my overall opinion on it. So Brendan Rodgers basically came out and said today that Celtic have not offered him a new deal yet. He said that he's happy at Celtic. He said he would do 3 years minimum. But the club needs to match ambition. The club needs to look to improve. And he's not a manager for standing still. And if that's not the case and the club doesn't move forward, he won't be the Celtic manager going forward. It's concerning. It proves what I've been saying for ages now. The board is so selfish. They are lazy, incompetent people who are outdated. They have no idea what's going on in modern day football. All they care about is taking home a bonus. They're very unambitious. They just don't invest properly for Celtic. You know, we have no plan in place. It's been going on far too long. Celtic have been getting away with it far too long. We got caught out with Neil Lennon during 2020 with the COVID season. You know, Brendan Rodgers the first time, leaving. Makes you wonder why Ange left as well. You know, did Ange... I know Spurs came in. That was a big opportunity for him. It didn't work out at Tottenham. But, would Ange have left potentially due to the board not willing to back him, and he'd be ambitious? Everything at the club's just slow, unambitious, selfish. The club just don't care. The people at the top need to go. I've said this for ages. Desmond needs to give up his stake in the club. 38% of the club is in his name. He owns 38. Well, he doesn't own it, but he basically controls 37% of the stake in the club. It's ridiculous. We got all these other shareholders at the top, who I've never seen before. I've never seen them speak about Celtic at all. They're not interested in talking to the fans. They don't give a crap about us. They've never come out and said, what the ambition is for the football club. And Brendan Rodgers, people will be saying, why is he saying this on the brink of our first league game? Is that going to demotivate the players, But it needs to be said, Celtic's transfer window so far has just been terrible. It's been lazy. His first transfer window when he came back was a disaster. We just got away with it because Rangers chucked it. Basically, we fell over the line, really. Last season, we won the double again, but we started the season really well. From September to December, we basically won the league, but then in the second half of the season, we sold Kyogo in January. Rodgers wanted a replacement. The board turned around and said, no, we didn't get a striker in to replace him. We had to rely on Dyson Maeda to get us through the season, and Adam Eder as well to a certain degree. That must have really annoyed Brendan. And then we had Nicholas Kuhn's departure recently. So Celtic are just sitting on their arse. They're not listening to the manager. Unfortunately, I can't see Brendan Rodgers being a Celtic manager next season. I think he will stay to the end of the season. If he leaves, in January, or a Premier League club, like Brentford looking for a manager at the moment. If Brentford came in now and said to Brendan Rodgers, do you fancy coming back to the Premier League? 100% Brendan would take it, which is a shame, because, Celtic is one of the biggest clubs in world football. But the people who run Celtic are not ambitious. They're the most selfish people in football, in my opinion. The most selfish club in board in terms of football clubs. We're not run correctly in terms of ambition. Yeah, domestically we've been successful, but we've been getting away with it far too long. Look at the other side of the city. Russell Martin, is building a team. Rangers have got new owners. These new American owners, they could easily blow us out of the water this season if we're not careful. We're not reactionary. We're just sitting on our arse. We react when it's too late. Where's our signings? Apart from Kieran Tierney and Benjamin Nygren, all the other signings we've made, not impressed with any of them, to be honest. In terms of where they've come from, I don't think any of them are going to be good enough personally. With all due respect to them, it's not their fault, but, Celtic shouldn't have got them in the first place. This guy from Man City, this defender on loan is complete waste of time. He's not going to play for us going forward. We did the same thing with Jason Denayer. We had Denayer on loan, developed him, never bothered buying him, never put in an obligation to buy for Manchester City. And then he went on to have success elsewhere, like at Lyon and Galatasaray. He could have easily been a good defender for Celtic. He'd done a good job for Celtic when he was here. Patrick Roberts, same thing, brought him when Rodgers was here the first time. On loan twice, never bothered, to buy him permanently. Celtic just so lazy. They don't want to take the risk. They act like we haven't got any money. It's not true. We have got the money. The people at the top of the club and the manager, this is going to cause problems throughout the rest of the season. I worry about this season now. You've got the manager complaining and criticising the people above him for not listening, not doing stuff quickly enough. Then he's talking about he won't be here, in the future if they don't match his ambition. And unfortunately, it'd be the manager that leaves, the boards, it'd be a great day, the day that the board leave, but that's not going to be for years and years and years, unfortunately. The board have been in there far too long, they're outdated, needs to be changed. Desmond needs to move on, he doesn't care about any of us, never at any, he does attend games, but, he's just more interested in golf than he is in Celtic, You never hear from him. He's very lazy bloke, in my opinion. Very lazy shareholder. Doesn't care about Celtic. Lorwell shouldn't be at the club whatsoever. Nicholson is just a puppet for the board. The board, the AGM. Complete waste of time. When it comes around this year, absolute waste of everybody's time. If they don't answer the questions, the board can't take criticism either, having fans escorted from the ground, from the AGM as well last year because somebody called the board out on their nonsense, They're very selfish people. They're not a very good board at all. Not a fan of them whatsoever. I don't know what the answer is, really. Protesting would be the way forward, I think, But we've got such a big waiting list. This is a problem. So many fans are going to keep pumping money into the club. It's really hard when you've got people who are happy with us winning in Scotland and don't want to progress further. But then you've got fans like myself and, even Brendan Rodgers to a certain degree, who want Celtic to be better than they actually are. I want us to have a really good go in Europe, like Rangers do in the Europa League. The Champions League is beyond us. You know what? The days of getting to the last 16 are very rare now. But we done so well in Europe last year. We nearly took Bayern Munich to extra time. We played really well. Arguably, we were the better team over both games against Bayern Munich. In my opinion, we played really well. We had some really good games in the Champions League last year. The game against, I know Slovan Bratislava are not a great side, but we hammered them 5-0. There was a game against Aston Villa. We lost 4-2, but, we were in the game at one point. We came from 2-0 down and drew it back to 2 each. Played really well defensively against Atlanta. Some of the players stood out as well. And, young boys, it was a good night. It wasn't a great performance, but we got the win, And then there was the 2 games with Bayern Munich. Both games were exciting. We created loads of chances, gave Bayern Munich all sorts of problems. And we played superbly well in Germany, in Munich as well. Brendan wants that again. I don't really know what else to say, really. Brendan, what has he got to do to persuade the board that this is the way forward? He did say, I'm clearly not doing my job well enough. I'm not getting my point across well enough to the board. I don't think that's true. I think the board are just refusing to listen. Because they think they know what's best for us. It's not true. They know bugger all, to be honest, in terms of ambition. All they want to do is stand still. All they care about is staying one step ahead of Rangers. That's going to come to a point where Rangers will catch on and will take over again. It's very concerning. It's not just a Europe problem. Rodgers wants us to stay on top of everything. But yeah, in my opinion, Brendan will leave. Not ideal. It's been a really negative summer with the transfer window. It's very, very frustrating. very, very annoyed in the moment with Celtic in the transfer window. You know, doesn't surprise me because the club do this every bloody time. You know, since Gordon Strachan, at least. Probably further back, even Martin O'Neill's last few years at Celtic. You know, Celtic have always done this. Really pisses me off. The club just does my head in terms of the people who run it. You know, they don't care about anything but themselves. And it will cost them. It really will. St Mirren on Sunday, first game of the season, do a reaction to that. But yeah, that's just my take. You know, I'm with Brendan Rodgers. You know, I'll never ever support the board in any decision at all. I've been against them for over 10 years, and I'll continue to do so. You know, advise any fan not to buy anything. If you haven't renewed a season ticket yet, don't do it. You know, don't buy any merchandise. Don't do anything like that. Just don't give them any money. Just don't give them anything. You know, they don't give us anything, so why should we give them anything as far as I'm concerned? But yeah, that's my reaction to that. I'll do a reaction to the game against St Mirren on Sunday. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.